I would have never said that I was a fearful person or that I had any fear before doing this. It doesn't feel like fear. It feels like conviction.
This is Slade Combs. Welcome to the Grandpa Channel. We believe we're all more alike than different. Every person has a story, and every story has the power to help us see our own story a little more clearly. I've noticed that some of the biggest turning points in life don't happen because we learn something new. They happen because we finally see something we've been missing all along. That's where this conversation begins. And this is what life has taught Slade the hard way. Let's listen. I'm Steve Harris, and people call me Rivers. Today we have a great guest. His name is Slade Combs, and he is a behavioral strategist specializing in the science of fear. Wow. And welcome to the show, Slade, and I'm really happy that you have granted us an audience.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. This is amazing. I'm excited to talk to America's grandpa. That's the biggest thing right here. Like America's #1 grandpa.
It's great to have you on. Tell us a little bit about your advertising career and how you kind of have morphed into what you're doing right now, Slade.
Back in the day when I would get on an airplane, they'd be like, "Oh, what do you do?" I was like, "Oh, I own an advertising agency in New York City." And that was one conversation that people could kind of quantify and understand.
Right.
But now when I get on a plane, they're like, "Hey, what is it that you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a behavioral strategist and I specialize in the science of fear." There's this moment where they're like, "I don't know if I want to continue this conversation and I don't even know what you're really talking about."
Yeah.
So
I'm feeling fear come over me.
So what's funny about it is it's not that much of a leap. I was in advertising for 20 years in New York. And in advertising, what we really are going after, like when you're scrolling on Instagram, when you're looking at ads, even old school advertising like TV, we consider that old school advertising now, right? Not even just like newspapers and billboards and stuff like that. But whatever content you're engaging with, what we're actually looking for in advertising is one very unique and specific unconscious fear. You don't know what it is. You don't even know that it exists. Your brain is actively hiding it from you. Typically, it develops in childhood, and we're looking for this one specific fear because negative emotion has as much as 5 times more power than positive emotion. So knowing that in advertising, we want to get to you as fast as we possibly can. We usually only have a few seconds to make some sort of a message or to move you to action. So we're just going to use negative emotion because it's just more economical. And the most powerful negative emotion that we have is fear. And so what we're looking for is this one specific fear that you have that you don't know you have. And if we can find out what that is, if we can understand its edges and be able to define that, we can use that to control you. And so that's what's happening. Like when you're scrolling on Instagram, we're trying to get to what exactly that is. And so in doing that for decades, I finally got to the point where I realized I don't want to keep hurting people with doing what it is that I'm doing. A lot of times I joke about advertisers being like psychologists whose job is to actually hurt you. Like we have ways and mechanisms to actually do that, right? And there's nothing you can do to control it. So yeah, hijacking the brain was what I did before, but now my job is to help people understand exactly what that fear is that they're running away from in their life, and more than that, what's on the other side of fear.
I haven't ever looked at advertising as fear-based. That's kind of how I would kind of summarize it. And frankly, I'm not trying to be funny, but maybe I am a little bit. That scares the hell out of me.
That means that we've done our job good. If you don't feel the fear, that's the whole point.
I find this fascinating. Give me some ideas or some fears that you play off of on the advertising.
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question. A lot of times when we think about fear, we think about conscious fear. Mm-hmm. So I usually refer to like spiders and snakes. I don't want to get into that elevator. It just feels claustrophobic. I don't want to fly on that plane. I have a fear of heights, that kind of a thing. These are conscious fears. And typically conscious fears are nowhere near as debilitating as an unconscious fear, because a conscious fear is something where you say, I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to consciously choose to move around it or to do something about this situation. When you have an unconscious fear and it works on you, it just forces you to move in a specific direction. But the way in which it forces you, you feel like you're making all of the right decisions. Usually what I say when it comes to an unconscious fear, especially your deepest and darkest unconscious fear, is that when you're actually doing it, you feel conviction. You feel like you're doing what's necessary to keep yourself safe, but the end result is suffering. So a fear like that could be, and again, these develop in childhood, right? our brains are always constantly scanning as we're children, is scanning the environment, trying to figure out what is threatening to me, what do I need to watch out for. And oddly, you don't even have to have something horrible happen to you. A lot of times when we talk about unconscious fear, people say, well, I wasn't traumatized as a kid. I don't have any like capital T trauma in my life. So there's capital T trauma that most people think about when it comes to like bad stuff happening to them. And then there's lowercase t trauma, which is actually called complex trauma. So complex trauma, they found in the recent decades that complex trauma can be just as problematic as capital T trauma because it usually goes unnoticed. There are these small little dynamics. It's not being abused when you're a child, but rather it's never being told that you're loved. It's not being hit with something specifically, but rather it's just, I'm going to withhold this thing, or I might just give you little shocks here and there of you're not as good as your brother, you're not as good as your sister, whatever that might be. So we go inside of your mind with you and we extract this fear. And when we extract that, what we're doing is we're going back in time. We're trying to figure out what is this dynamic that you suffered from. So a typical dynamic could be something akin to one client that I had. His mother was a very, very well-known lawyer. His father, a businessman who had started a number of businesses, very, very successful. Both of them successful in their own rights. Ivy League colleges, very, very kind people. But when it came down to it, you would look at his life and you'd say, I mean, this kid was basically a trust fund kid. Everything he'd ever wanted, he got, right? Like, the only thing he maybe could complain about would be like, I had a gold spoon, not a silver one, when I was being fed, right? But his deepest and darkest fear ended up being rooted in this idea that he will never be good enough. Looking at his parents and just seeing like how much they have accomplished inside of their life, and then thinking about himself, I'll never be good enough. And his parents not knowing it. This is the crazy part. We can actually, the fear itself typically comes from the dynamic of another human being. I could go into like the sociological and anthropological reasons for that. But the general concept is his parents were raising him. They wanted him to be successful. They wanted him to be happy. And so what ended up happening was every time he failed, they would withhold love and time and attention. Right? This is like, next time, do it better, right? But every time he won at something, right, brought home the gold medal to something, they gave him that love, that time and attention. So he learned over time that love is a commodity in his mind and that he has to earn it, but that he'll never actually be good enough because there's no way he'll ever be able to go beyond what his parents had already built. So his whole entire life was built on this kind of belief that he'll never be good enough, but he had no idea that existed. And this is the crazy part when I work with clients. Nobody knows what their fear is. We have to extract it because your brain is actively hiding it from you.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this on you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your journey with fear.
No, this is good. There's a concept that I call the predictable path. In Western society, especially in American society, we all grow up with this idea of a predictable path towards success, right? The minute you walk into school, you're already put on that path. In the end, this predictable path towards success, its formula has two parts to it. It really is, you're learning how to trade internal suffering for external results. If you can just handle enough internal suffering, just trade enough internal suffering, then you will get some sort of external result. And when you get that external result, then you can just shut it off. For most people, it's making enough millions where they can say, and now I can finally do what I want to do. So for me, I was in advertising, right? My wife is actually on Wall Street, and I mean, we had fun in New York. Like we had our kids there. We have 3 kids, and raised our kids. They're still kind of little, but they were all born there. And I mean, we were going to parties at the plaza for Christmas, and champagne for everybody at every single table, and flying all around the world. And especially me for my job, I was usually on a plane about 6 months out of the year in some foreign country, shooting models, driving cars and doing another advertising thing. And so my job as an advertiser was to paint the picture of the American dream. What does the American dream actually look like, and how can people achieve it by purchasing something? That was the idea, right? And how do you purchase something? Well, you have to work at a job. And what does that really mean? We'll get back on that predictable path of suffering, which is essentially trade some internal suffering for external results. And then you can buy the Bugatti. Then you can buy the watch or the Gucci or the whatever else that you want. So I had a long time where I thought, I'm doing great. Money's coming in, good lifestyle, everything's great. But I had no idea that I was suffering. I had no idea, because everywhere I looked at everybody around me, they were all kind of doing the same things. I mean, a 15-hour day in New York is like a normal work day, right?
Yeah.
Then COVID hits, and that kind of throws everybody for a loop. And I ended up getting a rare heart condition that was triggered by COVID, but actually persisted simply because of stress. It was a heart condition, and when I went and saw my cardiologist, they tried to solve it, and then in the end, the general concept was you're gonna die early. This is it. You're done. And when I thought about that, when I thought about that, I remember looking back, and I thought about my kids. And as I thought about my kids, the one thought that came to me was, I can teach them how to be successful. I mean, part of my job actually was consulting companies to teach them how to become more lucrative, right? On top of the advertising, I can teach them how to be successful, but at what expense? The best they're going to be able to do is to duplicate what I have done. And if it ends up in an early death because you're so stressed and you don't even know it, then I've got to solve this problem. I had no idea what to do, though, but there was one thing that I did learn in my career in advertising. Obviously, I knew about this fear. And so I realized, how do I live life on the other side of fear, and what does that look like? And what was the cost of advertising? What have I done to this world?
Yeah. Yes.
So I told my wife, her and I, we chatted, and we decided to leave New York and to just go out and into the world. We had no idea where to go. We literally would wake up in the morning and just ask the kids, where do you want to live today? We had to buy a car. We never owned a car, so we bought a car. And then we're like, oh, let's just go to New Hampshire. Sure, why not? It's fall. After New Hampshire, where do you guys want to live today? Oh, let's go down to Florida for a little while. Great, we'll live in Florida for a couple months. As we were doing that, we were doing this for years, right? And then I realized that I needed to face my own fear. My own personal fear, that's a story for another day. It's quite a long saga, but I ended up having to identify and face my own, which was something that I knew how to do.
Were you surprised, Slade, by what it was?
I actually was. I thought it was a person. I didn't realize that your fear isn't actually a person. It's an archetype. After I had faced my fear, after I had kind of like faced this person in my life, I had this moment. Not everybody gets the opportunity to do that, and not everybody needs to. But after I did that, I realized, I'm no longer afraid. But in doing that, I realized, no, it's not the person. The person is not what your brain records, although, I mean, it does, but it's not what it isolates. It's the dynamic. It's the persona. And then it was in that moment that I actually faced my own fear, that I realized, what do you really want? It was the inverse of it all.
Yeah.
And so then I realized, well, then I need to live a life of truth. I need to live a life of freedom. I need to live a life of fulfillment. And I had no idea how to do that, because if you asked me how to do any of those things, it would have all come back down to like, just get an awesome job and work super hard, make tons of money, and force people to do things that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
So we dismantled our life. We literally dismantled. We sold everything that we owned. We got rid of it all. We traveled around, and we designed a completely new way of living. And so we live radically different than we did before. Everything I own fits in a suitcase. And it's the most amazing experience that I've ever been able to have with a family going through that. And now my job is so fun, because I wake up in the morning and I just get to meet with people and work with companies and individuals, just saying, my job is to help you to become more fulfilled. And so let's work hand in hand in making that happen.
Wow. Talk to me a little bit about, I've heard the word archetype. Help me understand how you're using it so that I can better understand it.
Yeah, an archetype would be defined as, imagine the character of a person to find out what your fear is. We're going to pull out three things. Those three things are going to be, the first part is generally we would say, what is the general character trait of a person, right? Is it a selfish person? Is it an angry person? Is it a violent person? That kind of thing. The second thing that we're going to be able to discover, what is it that they do that causes so much harm? What is that action that they're taking that's so problematic? And then the third thing that we're able to identify is the reason why they did it. And it's not the objective reason. It's what you kind of understood as a child, right? So it's your own perspective, because that's what your brain's going to react to. So my own personal fear statement, we could create a fear statement for you. And in that fear statement, it has these three elements to it that you're going to be able to have. And those three elements, we call them your negative core motivators, but we inverse those to find out the good stuff, right? But mine is a manipulative person who takes away another's freedom for their own pleasure. So you can see inside of that, right? A manipulative, that is the exact opposite of like a truthful person, right? And someone who takes away your freedom is the exact opposite of somebody who helps others to find freedom. And for your own pleasure is exactly the opposite of not a base pleasure, but an actual for more like fulfillment. Like if you think of Maslow's, hierarchy, it's like way up there, not just these base things at the very, very bottom. And every single person has their own unique fear. In fact, one individual, he came from a very competitive family. And when we extracted his fear, the first part of his fear, right, that he identified, right, was a competitive person. So his first statement was a competitive person. And then he sat down and he's like, oh my gosh. And I was like, what? And he goes, I just thought that's how everybody is. That's how the world works. We're all just super competitive. When I asked him to inverse that, though, this is the funny thing. I was like, okay, we have to inverse this to find out what you want more than anything else in the world. Sometimes people find it difficult to inverse it because this fear has been held in isolation and you're unconscious for so long, your brain doesn't even want you getting close to it. So I asked him, what's the opposite of competition? For 20 minutes, he just sat there kind of fumbling, thinking, oh, hold on a second, I can think about it. And finally, he said, I think I've got it. It's winning well. And I was like, winning well? And he was like, yep, winning well. His lenses of competition were so intense, he couldn't see the world other than through the lens of winning or losing. So I said, well, what do you think about this? Instead of competing, right? What do you think about collaboration? And the minute I said that, he just went, oh my gosh, I had no idea. To this day, he's one of the most collaborative people that I know. And in fact, he ended up raising in the ranks in his company because he knew that he was a collaborative person deep down inside, and that's what he truly wanted. He makes more money, has more free time, has a much more fulfilled life. And when he changed his life, his brother called me up and was like, hey, what'd you do to my brother? He's the best version of himself, but I don't understand how you did this.
Aliens have abducted him. We're not sure who this person is.
Exactly.
That's really crazy.
One woman, she was incredible. She's in her 40s, never got married, always wanted to. We identified what her fear was, and she grieved for like a good 2 weeks. And, we met together, and she's like, what do you do? Like, what do you do with the life that you could have had, but didn't because you didn't know what this one fear is? Because once I found out what my fear is, I realized that's why the dating thing didn't work out for me. That's why the marriage thing didn't work out for me. That's why the kids never worked out for me. That's why I've had so many lost opportunities, because I didn't know that I was simply reacting to this one dynamic that was completely invisible to me.
Right.
It was hard for her. But once we discovered her purpose, that was the part where she said, now I can build something real. And she got excited.
So a couple of questions. This is absolutely fascinating to me. Does everybody have just one unconscious fear, or are there numerous unconscious fears? That's the first question.
Very good question. So if you can think about your fear like a dark planet. So as you're a kid and you're growing up and you're scanning the environment, there's going to be a dynamic that happens to you. Again, that dynamic can be, one time super violent, or it can be like that complex trauma that we were talking about. Just a simple dynamic that over time ends up adding up to a lot of stress for your brain. So because your brain really, really wants to be economical with the amount of energy that it takes in. So when you think about like your heartbeat and breathing, you don't have to think about those things. They just become unconscious processes. It creates a lens through which you see the world, like that guy that I was just talking about. He's going to look through the world, assuming that everybody else doesn't feel good enough and they have to win at everything. But when you think about other fears, imagine if this one fear that you have, this deepest and darkest unconscious fear, is like a dark planet. And that dark planet has so much mass, right? It's so intense. It has a gravitational pull. It can pull other things into its orbit. So a lot of times I'll talk about orbital fears, or kind of these ancillary fears that it can start pulling into it. One individual, and he's like, I have this fear of flying. I know flying is my fear. It is my deepest and darkest unconscious fear. As we went through and we extracted his fear and found out what it actually was, this was really interesting. He's like, oh my gosh, this is what happened. He got on a plane one day. He could fly forever, right? But then one day he gets on a plane and he sits next to a specific individual. He didn't know it, but this specific individual had the exact same characteristics as the person who was kind of the genesis of his fear. The same type of a person, same voice, same way of moving around, of vocalizing things. So even before the plane took off, he was already being triggered and was already in a state of fight or flight. As the plane took off, they had the most turbulence he's ever had before. So these two things compounded together. What happens is when we're triggered by our fear, our brain will then start scanning around for what's going on. And if you're up against your deepest and darkest fear, it will pull ancillary things into it if it has an intense enough of an account where it then says, okay, avoid this fear, but also avoid this stuff that's associated with that fear. So from that day, he was afraid of flying, but oddly, it wasn't really because of the turbulence. It was because of the person who he was sitting next to.
Were you surprised at some of the fears you've been wrestling with your entire life, Slade?
You know, what's interesting is once you find out what that dark planet is, everything else kind of falls into place. You can start to see things clearly. A lot of people, they say, in fact, I had one guy, he said, this is so crazy. It's like I can see through the matrix now. It's like I can see fear for what it is. And he was like, I would have never said that I was a fearful person or that I had any fear before doing this, because I didn't understand that this fear, like we talked about before, it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like conviction.
Very interesting. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Think in your mind of maybe the most mentally healthy who's just got his crap together. If we're going to use a nail, he's positive, he's pumped, he's successful. Do those sort of people, does everybody have these unconscious fears?
This is a good one, because a lot of times people might say, I don't have any conscious fears that hold me back. I'm not afraid of flying. You know, I can go jump off of a cliff into a river below. That's no big deal for me. And so there's this feeling that I'm kind of impervious. But really, when it comes down to it, when you are born all the way up until, like your double digits, like teen years and stuff like that, it's during this time where your brain doesn't know any different. It doesn't know about other kinds of dangers. It doesn't know that there's people starving, in a foreign country somewhere. There's some war-torn thing going on. All it knows is its experience, and what it's going to measure is relative fear. So this relative trauma, whether it's capital T or the complex trauma, it's just going to find out what that is. So quite honestly, for like a trust fund kid, it could literally be, I am afraid of silver spoons because I should have been given a gold one, and it just reminds me of how worthless I am. And so every single time he sees silver, he freaks out. Like, it could be, it's obviously not like that simple, right? The silver, but that's the concept. The concept really is it's looking for relative trauma, the worst case scenario that the brain has faced in its existence. And then this is the strange part. It actually embeds it in your neurology, and your brain begins to develop around that. I came to know this because when I was interviewing an individual in the Air Force, so his job actually was to bring people in. They would be interviewed by him to find out. I experienced some sort of really traumatic event while I was out in the field, and I need insurance. And so he was the one that was the gatekeeper that said, okay, did it actually happen because of your military experience, or did it happen somewhere else inside of your life? And I was like, look, you see the worst case scenario, people watching other people die, right? So you tell me, what is worse, the trauma that you might experience as a child, right? Capital T or lowercase t, or what you might experience out on a battlefield? And he said, this is a really fascinating question, and it's very, very clear. He's like, when I bring somebody into the office, if I have two people that have experienced the same exact thing, right? They were there in the foxhole at the same time. They witnessed somebody dying or some horrific experience, whatever that might be. He says, I'll bring them both in, right? One at a time. And he goes, the first question that I will ask is, tell me about your childhood.
Really?
And that's what I said. I was like, why do you do that? And he said, because the childhood trauma that you experienced, your brain develops around that. And for the rest of your life, it will experience everything else through that lens. So the trauma that you might experience on the battlefield will be experienced through the lens that you develop as a child. So that lens could actually create that trauma to be far, far worse on the battlefield. And for another person, it might not actually affect them at all. In advertising, we call it a psychographic, but essentially the idea is your demographic might change over time, your age, how much money you make, where you live. But this one fear, it doesn't change. So I can attack it when you're 20 and I can attack it when you're 50, and it doesn't matter. I can predict exactly how you're going to behave.
Very interesting. Are there people that are walking around that have no capital T or small t trauma? Are there people who've been able to sublimate or get rid of these inordinate fears? Or do you find that we're all just this is not a leading question, even that, but is there anybody who escapes this, Slade?
This is good, right? Is there any way to repair this or to heal this? And this is the great part. Neuroplasticity says, Yes. What's interesting is we can eliminate the negative emotion that's associated with this fear. We can also eliminate our knee-jerk reaction to it. But you have to become really aware of this. So as I work with clients, this is one thing that we work on adamantly is recognizing your personal suffering, recognizing when that suffering in your life is actually attached to this one dynamic, this one fear, and then working to eradicate that fear. And it just so happens to be that the inverse of your deepest and darkest fear is what your brain wants most. We call that your life's purpose, specifically because since your fear is neurologically based and it doesn't go away, although you can take the negative emotion associated with it and get it to the point where it doesn't affect you anymore, its inverse is also permanent because that's neurologically based. When you activate your life's purpose, your brain loves it, and you just have all these amazing chemicals just flush into your system. It's an actual chemical concoction that has a very unique signature just to you. Your fear is like a fingerprint, and so is your purpose.
Is this what you're talking about with flow?
So that's where flow is different, but this is what we want to get people to, right? So we want them to get to when they're living their life, building a business, being an employee, raising kids, whatever it is that you want to do. We want you to be in purposeful flow for 95% of your day. So purpose, if you could imagine, this is the inverse of your worst, deepest, and darkest fear. It's what your brain wants more than anything else in the world. So that gives you a very specific direction of what you want, right? So my purpose, we break it down, but essentially my purpose, it's to become a truthful person who helps others to find freedom for their own personal fulfillment. Everything I do in my career, everything I do as a dad, everything I do in my life is I just want to find more truth. I want to figure out how I can use that to be more free and to help other people be more free. And I want to be able to use that to have a more fulfilling life or to help other people have a more fulfilling life. Yours is going to be different. I've never had a client who's ever had the same, and I've done siblings before. Everybody has their own unique concoction. But that's the idea is you find out exactly what your purpose is. That gives you a very specific direction. So we usually say your purpose is going to give you a direction, and it's going to give you a perpetual source of energy to move in that direction because your brain rewards you when you activate that. And then the other side is flow. Flow is the science of optimal performance. It's an activity you do surely for the pleasure of the activity itself. It's usually associated with, like a skill or something like that. And so what we do is we combine the concept of flow, so being in flow in your life, but that flow has to move in the direction of your purpose. You put those two things together, then you end up with magic and crazy things, just amazing things happen.
I guess, let's say that you have an individual, just a hypothetical for you, Slade, an individual who seems to be beset by fears. It could be, a mixed bag of capital T and small t trauma. Is the recognition that you're being kind of, all jumbled up because of your fears, is that the first step? And then how the heck do you get to a more enlightened, sort of place?
Great question. So the first part is just knowing what you're actually running away from. Everybody is running away from something that their brain is actively hiding from them. So more often than not, we're spending all of our time and effort on these conscious fears. But every single time you pluck one out of that atmosphere, right? And there's space for another one to come in. So, if somebody is just like, oh, my really biggest problem is alcohol. I'm an alcoholic. I can't handle it, right? So you can take that out. You can take the behavior of alcoholism out. But that just leaves room for another vice to come in simply because the thing that's pulling it in, right? The real thing that's causing the stress and the trauma and the reactive, behaviors is the fear. And so once the first step is identifying what is my own personal deepest and darkest fear. You can't figure it out yourself. Second part is making that fear conscious. You actually have to move it from the limbic system. So we work on making that fear conscious. So we actually have I'll work with people to say, okay, you're going to become really, really attuned to when you suffer. And for some people, they're like, that sounds like a really sucky thing, Slade. You're just going to make me think about all the times I feel crappy. And it's like, well, here's what happens. When you take this fear and you become aware that something's happening. So something might happen in the here and now that triggers the fear, but you don't associate it with your childhood. We take that, we go back to the childhood, remember this dynamic. And for a lot of people, they remember memory. Something happened as I was a kid. What happens is that somatic memory moves from the limbic system into a different part of your brain, and it timestamps it. Once it timestamps it, the brain says, wow, that happened when I was 6, but I'm 40 now, and I'm okay. I'm not as threatened as I once was as a kid. So the negative emotion that you feel with this fear begins to decrease. I call it like walking through the haunted house, but with the lights on. If you walk in and you see the rubber spider, from Walmart just dangling from the ceiling and the duct tape on the walls, you start to realize this isn't as scary as I once thought it was. So the next time you walk into that haunted house, even if it is with the lights off on accident, right? You never know what's going to trigger you. You remember to yourself, like the brain remembers a 99-cent rubber spider from Walmart. Like that's what that thing is. You don't have to be that afraid. As that happens, at the same time, we activate their life's purpose. So it's like a chemical concoction that is an exact signature, right? It's the exact opposite as their fear. And we work on them activating that. So a typical day for that could be someone gets triggered. They then say simple thing like, how's this related to my fear? They go back and they think about it. I remember when I was 10, this one thing happened that sucked. For the fact that they remembered it, it moved inside of their brain. It became a memory, time-stamped. Now that memory won't bother them as much the next time. And then right after, we have them go activate their purpose. Usually not with the person who triggered them, somebody else that's safe. And that could just be like for me, right? Truth, freedom, fulfillment. I remember going to a grocery store and there was a girl working across the way and some guy went through the grocery line. He was really being a jerk and started yelling at the girl and complaining because he couldn't figure out his own credit card to put inside of the machine and just gave her this really, really hard time. She was almost on the brink of tears. And then he left, and then I was up there. Truth is my thing, right? Freedom and fulfillment. So the first thing I saw was that guy wasn't telling the truth. He was making mistakes with the credit card machine. It wasn't your fault. Also, you work at this job that's really hard. You've been on your feet all day long and probably been yelled at a couple times. So the truth is I went up to her and I said, wow, that guy was a jerk. She was like, what? And I go, in this place, must be really hard because you're on your feet all day long. That's the truth, right? That made her listen. Freedom. I don't know how much they're paying you at this company, but whatever it is, it's not enough because how you just dealt with that guy, there's no way I could have dealt with that guy the way that you did with such grace. I took her out of that cage that he put her inside of. And the fulfillment part, she just smiled. There was this moment that she just smiled and she was like, I was seen that day. For me, that's activating my purpose. And when I do that, like when you activate your purpose, you get this rush of like good chemical, dopamine, everything else, oxytocin. Like it's a rush that when you feel that, you're like, I will do this all day long. I will do this for free. I will do this everywhere. That's why, when I work with organizations, they love it because we can eliminate issues having to do with direction and motivation. We can put those to bed because we know I want to go in this direction. And when I do go in that direction, man, I have all the energy in the world to do it.
So an individual comes to you and says, I'm riddled by fear, Slade. I just know it. I don't know what to do. Walk me through a process of what you would recommend, what you do.
Yeah. So usually it's the ones who are like, Slade, I don't have any fears. Those are the worst. Because they're completely unconscious. They're like, oh, I'm impermeable. So if you actually come and you're like, I actually, I have people come to the program, right? They're like, I know that I'm being held back by something. I just know it. I can feel it. And I know that I have like fears in my life. I just want to figure out what that is, right? Those people generally come and they're like, okay, they're ready to discover it. For the people who are like, oh, I don't have any fears. Sometimes that can be such a revelation that they're quite shocked. So essentially they'll go through this 8-week process that I take them through, right? Discovering your fear only takes about 20 minutes. It's actually not that long.
I ask you how long that takes.
Yeah, 20 minutes. And so this 8-week process is actually getting people ready for that fear experience or that extraction. And so week 1 is getting ready for that fear extraction. Week 2, we actually extract that fear. And then week 3, we're going to inverse that fear to find out what your life's purpose is, what neurologically you want more than anything else in the world. That's a really interesting one because a lot of people think my purpose in life is to be a great dad or my purpose in life is to be a good employer. But when you think about that, right? Like I worked with an individual once who had a beautiful wife and 5 kids. And he was like, my life's purpose is to be an amazing dad and to be this amazing husband. But one day his wife and the kids got into a car. It was a stormy night. And they went out just to go watch the movies, but he stayed home to work and they never came home. And this is the challenge when we start looking at a role or a goal as our life's purpose, right? And because by their nature they are temporary, they can be taken away from us. This is the moment that when they are gone, we can be left thinking, well, then I don't have purpose anymore. Why am I even here on this planet? But you just know, for that one guy, you know that when his family was taken away, as horrific as that was, you know that deep down inside of him, he had even more to offer. And why? Because he experienced something painful and therefore knows the value of what's on the other side of that pain. He knows the value of having a spouse. He knows the value of having kids. And he would be an advocate for that. And so this is the great thing about your fear, is that you become an advocate for its inverse. You become an advocate, number one, to say, I don't want people like this behaving like this in the world, right? And on the other side, and I want to create a more beautiful world like this. You always end up with a virtue when you inverse, trauma like that. And so as we go through the program, that's the first half, as we take people through this idea of identifying what is your fear, what is your purpose, and breaking that down. And then the second half of the program is actually applying that to your life, whether it's to build a business, whether it's to do something at your home, a side hustle, whatever that might be. We actually talk about the prosperity formula, how you can be successful by becoming healthier and happier, by increasing your well-being, as opposed to the predictable path of just trading internal suffering for external results.
So kind of to wind things up, my theory is that all of us have superpowers. All of us. It sounds hokey, but I think every single human being on planet Earth has gifts that they have. And if you were to kind of distill down to one or two or even three superpowers that you feel like you've been gifted with, Slade, what would they be?
So this is it.
Yeah.
Truth, freedom, and fulfillment. What I found that's interesting is that the greatest thing that you have suffered is your greatest gift. You've just got to find out what that was, and then you can inverse that. And so from an evolutionary perspective, this is an amazing way for the brain just to say, I can still help the tribe because I can work toward the greater good, even though I've suffered from something terrible. Or for that question, for a lot of people who believe in a God and ask that question, how could a good and loving God allow such terrible things to happen to kids? This is the idea. The suffering that you've experienced as a child is your greatest gift.
Very, very interesting. You've given me a lot to think about, Slade. I'm very appreciative that you would come on and share these things with us.
Anybody out there, if they're interested,
please.
We're going to be opening up a cohort. So if they want to join and actually find out what their fear is, they want to inverse that, find out what their purpose is, and go through the program and how to live a more prosperous life, knowing these kinds of things, they can just go to sladecombs.com. It's so fun. It's so fun to be with people, watching their lives transform, watching them progress and grow, and watching them overcome these huge challenges in their life and do incredible things, especially for the people who come after them, their kids and grandkids and everything else.
Well, thank you again, and have a lovely weekend.
You as well.
Okay, thanks, Slade. One of the ideas I keep coming back to from this conversation is that what feels certain isn't always true. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't to defend our first reaction, but to be curious enough to ask where it came from. That kind of curiosity doesn't just change conversations. It changes relationships, and sometimes it changes us. Every story has two stories, the one you just heard and the one it stirs in your own life. If you'd like to spend a few minutes with the story of your life, we've created a reflection journal with a few prompts inspired by today's episode. You'll find it in the description. Because here at the Grandpa Channel, we believe we're all more alike than different. Every person has a story, and every story helps us see our own a little more clearly. Until next time, this is Rivers from the Grandpa Channel signing off. Keep looking for the stories that connect us all.
That the greatest thing that you have suffered is your greatest gift.